What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I want to talk to you about a Marvel Comics miniseries from maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little longer ago. This is X-Men and Spider-Man. This is a 4-issue miniseries written by Christos Gage with art, I believe that's penciling and inking by Mario Alberti, with lettering by Jared K. Fletcher. Years ago, this was when I first started my channel, I think. I did a video showcasing my X-Men comic book collection, and in that video I talked a little bit of smack about this comic. I really hated this comic, and I saw it sticking out of the shelf. It's a hardcover, so it's a little comes out a little more than your average comic book, and so I thought, you know what, I haven't read this thing in probably 10 years or a little more. I'm going to give it another shot. I'm going to see if it's as bad as I remembered it, or if maybe I was being a little bit too harsh. Sometimes I can read something or watch something and really hate it, and then years later I can give it another go and I can find something more to appreciate with it. So I wanted to see if that could happen with this, and I will say this isn't as bad as I remembered it. I still don't think it's a great story, but I think that it's fun. If you are not very familiar with the X-Men, I'm not very familiar with Spider-Man. I know who Spider-Man is, but I don't know the ins and outs of the 50 plus years of Spider-Man's history. So looking at this is one of those continuity implant series where it's set in between issues that came out forever ago. In premise, it's very similar to a 12-issue miniseries called World's Finest that was by Carl Kessel, I believe, and I know there were some other people who worked on that, and off the top of my head, I can't remember who else worked on that miniseries, but basically it's saying, here's a few standalone adventures between Spider-Man and the X-Men set at different points in their history. So the first issue is set sometime, I want to say shortly after X-Men issue 66. This is after the X-Men fought the Hulk, so that's close to the end of the Silver Age X-Men stuff. And then Peter Parker is still dating Gwen Stacy at this point. He is Harry Osborn's roommate. The next issue is set after the death of Kraven the Hunter and after the Mutant Massacre, so that would have been around 1987, I think. The next issue is after Fatal Attractions, so Wolverine does not have adamantium on his claws at this point, and it's sometime after the introduction of Carnage. And then the final issue of this miniseries is, I guess, set sometime close to the present day. It's at least set after House of M, and I forgot to look at exactly when this came out, but I want to say a few years after House of M, maybe a year after House of M, I don't know. A fun little bit of history about this: around the time when this was coming out, I didn't buy it in singles when it was coming out, but I was buying an X-Men miniseries. I want to say it was X-Men Manifest Destiny, maybe. It was one of those minis that is kind of sort of a tie-in to a big event, but it really it wasn't a necessary story to read. Each issue had like 3 or 4 short stories about some of the minor X-Men that weren't being headlined in a main title. And one of the issues, 2 or 3, I bought it at the comic book store, went home and opened it up, and then it was issue 1 of X-Men and Spider-Man, but with a cover of X-Men Manifest Destiny issue whatever. I think it was Manifest Destiny. It might have been another miniseries similar to that. But I remember that was kind of a mistake that they made, putting the wrong cover on the wrong comic, and this might have even been technically before X-Men and Spider-Man the miniseries was supposed to have come out. So anyone who wanted to be dishonest about it, they could have read this issue before it even was supposed to come out. But I was able to take it back to the shop and get the issue that I wanted, I think, the following week. But I did read this in hardcover. That's how I read it the first time. And the basic premise is each of these stories is set at some point in the past, and you can enjoy this if you're pretty familiar with the continuity of the X-Men and Spider-Man. At one point in the issue set in the mid-90s, it's actually Ben Reilly, because at that time, Spider-Man's clone, Ben Reilly, who at the time, I think the idea was Peter was under the impression that he was the clone and Ben Reilly was the real deal, so he was going around telling the X-Men in this issue that he is the real original Spider-Man, and he had memories of what happened in the first issue when they fought the Blob and Kraven the Hunter. So if you are familiar with the continuity, it's probably going to be a good time, and if you don't really know the continuity, if you're aware of who these characters are, I would say as long as you know who Kraven the Hunter is, Blob, Carnage, the Marauders, although that's kind of a deep pool, so you might not know who they are. They haven't really been a big part of the X-Men books in 20 years or more. But as long as you know who these characters are, you're probably going to have a good time. If you don't know, okay, Dazzler, she first joined the X-Men around 1987, but she first appeared in 1980, you don't have to know all that stuff to really appreciate and enjoy this book. I think that as a continuity implant story, it's pretty good. Having said that, I think the story itself is pretty silly. So in the first issue, Kraven the Hunter has just been released from prison, and he goes on TV and says he believes that Spider-Man is a mutant. And the X-Men are watching this, and so they say, we've got to find Spider-Man, we've got to warn him about all of the enemies who chase after us because we're mutants. People like Sauron, Magneto, and the Sentinels. And so they go into a coffee shop where Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson, Harry Osborn, Flash Thompson, and Peter Parker are hanging out. They just happen to be in there, and I'm fine with a little bit of coincidental happenstance like that. And Jean says she thinks Spider-Man might be in here. It was actually Angel's idea to go in here. He said, well, we know Spider-Man is about our age, so let's go into a place where young people like us are hanging out, and maybe we'll find Spider-Man. I don't know how the X-Men know that Spider-Man is their age. For all they know, he could be like 45 and just in really good shape. They don't know that he is about their age. He is. That was an extraordinary leap in a jump to conclusions, a leap in logic, I should say. But anyway, they're there, and then Kraven the Hunter busts in because apparently he can smell Spider-Man is nearby. I don't know what the deal is with Kraven. I know the Ultimate Universe version of Kraven, he was a normal dude, and then he did some experimentation on himself to give himself some more animalistic powers. I don't know if Marvel 616, the main universe Kraven, I don't know if he has abilities. At one point he has claws and he scratches Beast, but those could have been like something he added onto his glove. So I don't know if Kraven actually has powers. That's something I don't really know much about Kraven, but he apparently senses that Spider-Man is in here, and he brought the Blob with him because I guess he thought maybe the X-Men were going to show up and attack him. And basically, he gets a DNA sample from all of the X-Men, and then he goes to Mr. Sinister. Now, Mr. Sinister was not introduced and created until the mid to late 80s, but this is saying that he was active during the Silver Age of Marvel. I'm fine with that. But basically, Sinister had hired Kraven to get DNA samples of the X-Men. And I don't know how Kraven knows that the X-Men are going to show up when he says that Spider-Man is a mutant. This book actually also collects issue 35 of the original Silver Age X-Men, where the X-Men were searching for Factor 3. That's an issue that I somewhat recently talked about in examining the Silver Age X-Men. And they end up finding Spider-Man, and they think he's a mutant, and they fight him for a little bit, and then Jean Grey tells them, no, he's not a mutant. And so this takes place after that. And so I don't know how Kraven thinks that the X-Men are going to show up, because the last time the X-Men and Spider-Man fought, they were mad at each other. The X-Men thought that Spider-Man was a mutant possibly working for Factor 3 because of a vague warning that Banshee gave them. And Spider-Man is getting attacked by these guys, and he's kind of mouthing off to them as they let him go. So there's no reason to suspect that the X-Men are going to seek out Spider-Man and warn him about some of the people that might come after him. For all Kraven knows, it's just going to be Spider-Man here. So thought it was a little weird that Kraven somehow knows that the X-Men are going to show up, and then he can get their DNA. But then the next issue takes place after the Mutant Massacre, and this is when the X-Men already know a little bit about Mr. Sinister. They know that he's a guy, but they don't really know anything about him. And then Spider-Man at this point wearing the black suit. This is right after the death of Kraven the Hunter, and Spider-Man went into Kraven's house or apartment looking for any information that Kraven might have had on him, because Kraven saw his face, and Spider-Man doesn't want anyone else to find out who he is. Kraven might reveal that information to someone else from the grave. So Spider-Man finds out that Kraven had been dealing with a guy named Mr. Sinister. He goes and tells the X-Men. Then they go and fight the Marauders. And once again, we see that Mr. Sinister has created clones of the X-Men. I don't know why I said once again. It's the first time it happened. But that's building off of what happened in the previous issue. And then this secret underground lair explodes. And then the next issue, this is the Ben Reilly issue, set sometime after the Fatal Attraction story where Wolverine lost his adamantium. At this point, Mr. Sinister wants to break into whatever the Marvel Comics version of Arkham Asylum is. It was in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, the movie, and I don't remember the name of it, but that's where Carnage is being held, and Sinister wants to use a little bit of the Carnage symbiote so that he can stabilize his clones and help the clones become better than the people that they are cloned from. But somehow the X-Men, they found out about this. I don't remember how. They got some more of Mr. Sinister's files and find out he wants the Carnage symbiote, so they go to Spider-Man, and then they go to, it's like the Webcraft or Mycraft or Mycroft is something like that, something Croft Institute, which is basically just Arkham Asylum. They go there, they fight Mr. Sinister a little bit, fight Cletus Cassidy Carnage. He bites Wolverine's claws off, and then almost immediately Wolverine's claws grow back. After he lost his adamantium, if his claws broke, it would take a while for them to grow back. They would grow back eventually, but it wasn't like it would happen in seconds like it did here. I thought that was weird. At one point, Wolverine says, "Man, I've got to get my adamantium back." Thought that was a little weird too. At this point, he was kind of despairing that he had lost his adamantium because it kind of drove him a little crazy. He was much more animalistic after he lost his adamantium, but as far as he knows, there is no way that he can get his adamantium back. So thought that was a little weird. There's also a few other cutesy references like that in the issue where Spider-Man is wearing the black suit. He says, "Can you imagine having a clone of you running around? That would be crazy." Wah wah. And of course, in the next issue, his clone is running around, and his clone thinks that he's the original Spider-Man. And then the final issue, we see the culmination of everything that Mr. Sinister has been working on in this miniseries. He has been creating a super clone of Kraven the Hunter and the original 5 X-Men. And this clone calls himself Zraven. That's Raven with an X in front of it. And this is really silly. So apparently Mr. Sinister wants this guy to go around and collect DNA from all of the mutants that are left after House of M. And he wants to replace them with super clones who I guess are better than the mutants that they are cloned from. And so Zraven goes and he kills a Morlock somewhere close to the Morlock tunnels, just straight up murders him and takes the DNA. And then Spider-Man is called in by the X-Men because they're investigating this. The one who was there who survived, he was no longer a mutant. He tells the X-Men that it was Kraven the Hunter. At this point in time, mid-2000s, Kraven is believed to be dead. I don't know what's going on there. There's at least twice that Kraven has been believed to be dead. Spider-Man even says, "Oh, he's 100% dead as any of us can be." And I'm thinking, yeah, but that's what you thought after the death of Kraven the Hunter. And then he showed back up again later, I think. I don't know. Maybe not. I think he showed up again later in the 90s. But anyway, basically, this guy, his job is to collect DNA of mutants and bring it to Sinister. I don't understand why he's killing mutants, though. He kills the Morlock, and Mr. Sinister, his whole thing is trying to create the super mutant. I don't know, maybe once he has DNA of someone, then he can have the X-Men killed. He already has the DNA of the original 5 X-Men, so I don't know why he didn't order Zraven to go and kill those guys. But it's a little weird that his whole goal is to create better mutants, but then this guy is also going around killing mutants. I didn't think that really lined up with the Mr. Sinister modus operandi that we're familiar with. And then at the end of the issue, Zraven flees, and then Spider-Man and the X-Men are like, "Well, we've had a lot of crazy adventures over the years. Look at us." And then Zraven goes back to Mr. Sinister, and he says, "I don't want to work for you anymore." And then he attacks Mr. Sinister. There's an explosion. And, of course, we know that Mr. Sinister doesn't die because he shows up again later in X-Men Comics. And I'm assuming that Zraven does die because I don't think we've ever seen him again after this. I think this is okay. The thing that I like the most about it is that each issue pretty much stands on its own. If you come in with issue 3, you're not going to be super confused about what happened in issue 1 and 2. You can read it on its own. It references the previous issues a little bit, but because this is set years apart in between each issue, it's a pretty good jumping on point in each issue. Any one of these issues you could hand to someone by itself, and it's a nice little standalone story, but they all 4 build to something better, or build to something bigger, I should say, because I don't think that the overall story is that good. I think it is a little bit silly. Cloning Kraven the Hunter, why? He's interested in mutants. Cyclops even says at one point, he's only interested in mutants. He doesn't really care about your DNA, Spider-Man. Yeah, but he cloned Kraven the Hunter. And again, I don't know if Kraven has abilities or if he's just a heightened human and he's really good, but he doesn't have any powers per se. At one point, he shoots lasers out of his nipples, so I don't know if that's all technology that he has and just really good skills, or if he has superhuman abilities, but I don't know why he wants to clone Kraven the Hunter other than this is a book that's called X-Men and Spider-Man, and so we have to have a Spider-Man villain in here as well as an X-Men villain. That's the only reason that I can think of that he wants to clone Kraven the Hunter. It does completely go against his modus operandi in this book and also in every other comic that has had Mr. Sinister. And also, at the end of the day, the X-Men and Spider-Man don't really accomplish anything. They don't defeat Sinister and Zraven. Zraven gets away, and then he fights Mr. Sinister, and I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Zraven shows up again in something else that Christos Gage wrote. There was an Adjectiveless X-Men series that was coming out around the time when the X-Men were living on Utopia Island off of the coast of California, and Christos Gage wrote some of that, I think. So maybe Zraven shows up again later. I don't know. But it ends in a weird way where it's like, well, we did it. No, you didn't. You didn't really do anything. You didn't defeat the bad guy. He went and defeated the other bad guy himself. So is this as bad as I was letting on years ago whenever I was talking about this book in my collection video? No. Is it a good comic? I would say it's fine. It's a harmless book. It's not the worst thing that I've ever read. It's not even the worst thing that Christos Gage has ever written. I think he has written worse than this. I think he also did something similar to this with Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, which I have not read. I don't know if it's any better than that or if that thing is worse than this. But I think it's okay. It's not something I'm probably going to read again. I think the story is pretty weak, but it is enjoyable getting these little snips of the previous continuities and getting to see them again through the lens of the modern day. I do wish that the art could have each issue. I wish it could have reflected what comics looked like at that time. Mario Alberti, he does a really good job, although I think I would have preferred his art just on covers. Interior work is good. At times, it's very dark and muddy looking, and I think that's a stylistic choice. I don't think that's something that he's not trying to do. I think he's deliberately doing that, and it's not something that I personally like, but that's something that other people probably like more than I do. But I wish we could have had, like, issue 1 looks like something that came out in the 1960s, and then issue 2 looks like something that would have come out in the mid-70s. Maybe you could get Mike Zeck, who drew the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline, maybe you could get him to illustrate an issue. Maybe you could get one of the Kubers who was drawing the X-Men in the early 90s. Maybe you could get him to draw issue 3 that's set in the mid-90s. That could have been really cool, but then I don't know if they wanted to do that. I feel like they wanted to just have it one singular artistic vision, and I don't know if there's any artists out there who would be able to mimic the art style of the 1960s or the art style of the mid-80s. I don't know if anyone out there would be able to do that successfully, and that's fine. I think the art is pretty good. It's probably my favorite thing about the book. I think the art is superior to the writing here. Overall, not a bad book, but also not great. Definitely not as bad as I remembered it being. So that's it for me talking about X-Men Spider-Man. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to throw a like down there and comment. What did you guys think of this book if you've read it? Did I make you interested in reading it? Maybe not. Anyway, that's about all I have today, so I will see you guys in the future with other videos. Have a good one.